Hello, everyone. I'm Nikki Blunier with the IPM Institute Sustainable Communities Group. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Activities and Findings of the Delaware State Tick Program, presented by Dr. Ashley Kennedy, board certified entomologist and Delaware State tick biologist. The Tick IPM Working Group is funded through the North Central IPM Center, supported by the USDA's National Institute of Food and Agriculture. The Tick IPM Working Group is part of the IPM Institute, which was founded in 1998 with the goal to increase adoption of integrated pest management in agriculture and communities using an educational and solutions-based approach. The organization is split into two groups, Sustainable Food Group and Sustainable Communities Group. Tick IPM Working Group is part of the Sustainable Communities Group, and we focus on integrated tick management and education around ticks and tick-borne diseases. We host the annual virtual Tick Academy and produce educational resources. A couple of other programs in the Sustainable Communities Group include Pest Defense for Healthy Schools, which focuses on educating K through 12 staff about IPM and best practices to limit exposure and impacts to students. And we have free IPM courses on our website. And then Green Shield Certified is a certification program with a mission to reduce use of pesticides and provide best use practices for pest management professionals, facilities, and landscape companies. You can follow us on our social media and find recordings of previous webinars on our YouTube channel. So here's all of our different social media handles. And I wanted to welcome Dr. Kennedy. And while she shares her slides, I'm going to launch a pre-question, which is something we use to gauge audience participation, and you will answer the same question afterwards, and we'll see how much you learned. And we'll also take questions at the end of the presentation. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and launch the pre-question while you get your slides up.
Okay, now let me know if you can see my slides and not my notes.
Yeah, no notes,
Okay,
just your
perfect.
slides.
Okay,
Looks good.
nailed it.
So,
Um,
you can go ahead and get started. People can just answer this question and then I'll close it after a little bit.
okay, well, thank you so much for the opportunity to share with this group. I've been attending these webinars for a long time and I've learned so much from them. So it's just a really cool community.
Awesome. Glad you're here.
So I'll just uh, dive right in, I guess. Um, So I was going to share a little bit about myself before I really dive in. I grew up in Northern Virginia, and what it has in common with Delaware is that it is a major hotspot for ticks and tick-borne diseases. So it's something I grew up being very familiar with, and especially because I spent a lot of time outdoors, whether it was like hiking or fishing or walking my dogs. I was always a big dog lover. I think that's one of the first things people learn about me. So with all the time I spent outside, it's probably no surprise that I do have some firsthand experience with tick-borne diseases. So I first got Lyme disease when I was just 3 years old, which was back in the 1980s. And I used to not share this part of my story when I was giving a scientific talk because especially earlier in my career, I would occasionally hear researchers make kind of uh, disdainful or derogatory comments about Lyme disease patients. And so I felt like if I revealed that I was a Lyme disease patient too, I might not be taken seriously by my scientific colleagues. And then more recently, I've been a little more outspoken about that part of my experience because it's what inspired me to pursue this field in the first place. And I'm also really glad to say that I think the stigma is eroding and people are much more open-minded than they were when I first got started. So um, yeah, so that was really what drove me to study entomology. So I went to the University of Delaware for grad school. Spent a lot of time looking into a microscope, learning how to identify things, how to work my way through a diagnostic key. And then following grad school, I went to what's called the MILTIC lab at the Defense Centers for Public Health at Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland. And my supervisor there, Robin Nadolny, I'd like to say she taught me everything I know about ticks. She was just a really fantastic supervisor and mentor. So I went from that postdoc opportunity straight into my current employment with uh, DENREC, which is our Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Control. So I'm going to share a little bit about the history of our program. But really, why did it get started in the first place? It's because we are such a hotspot for tick-borne diseases. So Lyme disease, as is the case in so many parts of the world, that's our number one highest incidence tick-borne disease. But we also have spotted fever rickettsiosis, ehrlichiosis, alpha-gal syndrome, and others. And if you're looking at it county by county, we usually hover right around sixth in the country. For Newcastle County, that's our northernmost and most populous county in the state. And again, just kind of tying this back to personal experience, the lower photo here is actually my spouse. So he's our sort of Lyme disease poster boy on our website here. Um, so our program got started actually thanks to Lyme disease patients and other advocates for tick-borne disease patients who basically asked the legislature to do something about Lyme disease because it was, it felt like it was getting out of control. So many people were getting sick. And so the state convened a Lyme disease prevention task force back in 2014. And they compiled and submitted a final report to the governor and to the General Assembly. And that prompted the state to authorize an official state tick program. And they decided it would be a part of the Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Control, and specifically within the Division of Fish and Wildlife in our mosquito control section. So I know different states handle mosquito control differently. Sometimes it's county by county. Delaware has only 3 counties. We have sort of the privilege of being a small state. So mosquito control is a state service. And the program officially got off the ground back in March 2019. This is a photo of my predecessor, Dr. Lauren Maestas, who did a really phenomenal job just starting the program from scratch. And so I got to take over about a year after it started, after he did the hard work of getting it up and running. And we have 3 major objectives. The first one that I think of as the bread and butter is surveillance, because since we are a new program, I don't know how long I can get away with saying we're new now that we're in our 7th year, but um, it was when I first came on board, it was really about we needed to get baseline data, answer some of the most basic questions about what kind of ticks do we have here, when and where are people most likely to encounter them, what kinds of pathogens are they carrying, and at what prevalence. And so we teamed up with Delaware Technical Community College. We have a lot of different partnerships with different agencies and institutions, but I think of that partnership as our strongest and our oldest collaboration, and it has really paid off. It's been such a mutually beneficial relationship. So there's a molecular biology lab there that tests a subset of the ticks that we collect from our natural lands. And the students learn how to do the testing themselves. So they get really useful lab skills and we get the results. And so we help to fund some of the equipment that they use in the lab, and we provide the ticks. And it's just been like a really cool collaboration. We also do education and outreach. Some of that is virtual, especially because when I was first getting started, it was May 2020, so everything was virtual. So we have a series of web pages that you can find at de.gov/ticks. But I also try and give talks to different audiences. So, master gardeners, or this morning I spoke at the Delaware Farm Safety Conference. The photo on the lower right is from the Delaware State Fair, where we set up an info booth last summer. So always trying to find audiences that might be particularly at risk of encountering ticks. But really, I don't think it affects unique populations. I think anyone who lives in Delaware is at risk of a tick bite, just because they are so very numerous here. And the third thing is investigating different tick management techniques, trying to figure out which ones are best suited for our situation here, just based on which species we have and our climate. So all of the methods that we're investigating have been tried in other places, but every place is different. So we want to see, are they going to be effective here too? And I have just the images here are not meant to be endorsements. They're just representing some of the different options that are out there. So I mentioned that the surveillance is what has taken up most of our time and attention thus far. So our routine surveillance activities, things that we're committed to doing around the clock, like year round, we drag vegetation on public lands. Um, and we do that truly year round. We don't get a break from tick activity here. Our winters tend to be mild enough that we can find ticks um, pretty much anytime we go looking for them. This year did throw a wrench into our schedule for a little bit. We did get more snow and more sustained cold temperatures than we're used to. So we had about a 3-week gap of collecting no ticks, but um, that was the longest we had ever gone since the program got started without collecting ticks. So we go out and get them from the field, bring them back to identify under a microscope, and send a subset to Delaware Technical Community College for pathogen testing. We've also sent some to the CDC, and we've sent some to other researchers upon request. So we tend to collect more ticks than we could ever possibly process ourselves. So we're always looking for people who can find a good use for them. So, always happy to share specimens for research. And collecting ticks from vegetation, that basic dragging that we do, answers a lot of those questions we have about distribution and phenology or seasonality, population density, and pathogen prevalence, but it doesn't answer all the questions we have. So I'm also very interested in host associations. Just by knowing which species the ticks are feeding on, that can kind of offer us insight into opportunities for pathogen spillover from a wildlife reservoir into other species. So to kind of untangle the more complex ecological questions, we want to do targeted collections directly from hosts. And this is where our partnerships with other agencies have really come into play. So we've been lucky enough to team up with ornithologists who do bird banding, and they set up mist nets to catch birds and release them unharmed. So they've been gracious enough to collect ticks from us and to train us in handling the birds as well. We have done small mammal trapping, typically with Sherman live traps to catch rodents such as mice, and also, I shouldn't say exclusively rodents because also shrews. And we've done squirrel trapping, and we've assisted with bat catches, although to be perfectly candid, the bat catches have not yet paid off with any bat ticks, although we did get bat bugs, which was another fun ectoparasite to work with. Um, one of the one of the other really strong collaborations we have is with USDA APHIS Wildlife Services. So they remove mesopredators from the beaches where our threatened and endangered shorebirds nest, typically from the spring through the summer. And so they were already, that had been going on for years before the tick program began. They were already trapping and removing predators, namely red foxes, from the beaches. So they offered to let us, inspect those carcasses after, since they were already going to be removed anyways. So we've gotten loads of ticks from red foxes, but also from gray foxes, coyotes, raccoons, and opossums. Thanks to that collaboration. And then they also will remove what are considered, nuisance animals. So, for example, beavers who have constructed dams in places where they led to, very inconvenient flooding and property damage. So we've collected beaver ticks from beavers in cooperation with USDA. We also collect ticks from hunter harvested game. So what that usually looks like for us is during November when we have the opening weekend of the general firearm season for white-tailed deer, we'll go to the butcher shops where hunters take their deer to be processed, and we'll ask for permission to remove ticks from them. We also will look at wild turkey that's harvested usually in April. And then as we're doing all of our other activities throughout the year, driving around from one park to another, We're always keeping an eye open for fresh roadkill. And that is a little bit gruesome, but it has allowed us to access some wildlife species that we might not otherwise get to handle. So for example, we don't have resident black bears in Delaware, but there was one that was passing through and unfortunately got hit by a car. So now, for the first time, we have records of ticks from black bear in Delaware. So everything I've described so far falls under our active surveillance umbrella, but we also do passive surveillance, or as I think of it, crowdsourcing ticks. This is usually with veterinary clinics. We have, at any given time, about 20 to 25 participating veterinary clinics throughout the state that will collect ticks from their patients and will stop by usually twice a year to pick them up and give them a fresh set of vials and labels. Sometimes we get ticks sent to us directly from pet owners or from other sources. Basically, ticks from anyone who works with animals is what we're interested in, just trying to diversify our host records as much as possible. So that could be farmers or from stables. We started getting ticks from the Brandywine Zoo. So we have now records of ticks on red panda and poodoo in Delaware, which was just exciting for me to see such exotic hosts. And we also get ticks submitted by wildlife rehabilitators who work with a whole range of mammals and reptiles and birds. So if you combine all of those different methods of trying to get our hands on ticks, we've come up with now with a list of 19 species that we either found or that had been previously reported in the literature. So in this list here, I have the year of the first report of that species. Um, and when I'm sharing this with the public, I always like to remind them, like, yes, there's 19, but the good news is a lot of these are what we consider wildlife specialists, and they're very unlikely to make trouble for people. So for example, the squirrel tick, Ixodes marxi, has only been found in Delaware on red squirrels specifically, and we don't have a widespread population of red squirrels here. They're really only up in the northernmost part of our state in the Piedmont, and most of our state is in the coastal plain. Uh, so that's not one that I think people need to be particularly alarmed about. Another one is the beaver tick I mentioned earlier. We have only ever collected it from beavers. And then the bat tick, we've only found a handful of specimens that were submitted from human habitations, but not feeding on people. And we suspect that there were bat roosts in their attic. So this is a species that's known to have like a pretty close association with the big brown bat in particular, but is unlikely to feed on people, although there are reports. Um, so the three that I do worry about, the three that are most likely to bite people are shown here in red. Probably no big surprises here. These are, widespread species across much of North America. So we've got the American dog tick, the Lone Star tick, and the black-legged tick. And if you're interested in learning more about all the different ticks that we have encountered here, last year we published an official checklist, and this was not the first time that a checklist was published for Delaware. There had been one previously published by University of Delaware professor Donald McCreary, but that was way back in 1945. So you can see here that the first 8 tick species on the list were reported in 1945, and that was in that checklist. But we thought, it's been 80 years, a lot has changed. Some of the species that were reported at that time in very, very small numbers and not considered established are now very well established. So for example, in 1945, the Lone Star tick was only known from, I think, 3 or 5 specimens. And now, well, I'll show you some numbers about how many we're collecting these days. Um, and likewise, the black-legged tick had not was not established at that time because there was more than a century in Delaware's history where white-tailed deer were eradicated from the state, and it was actually illegal to hunt them for a long time. So, so the black-legged tick did not reestablish until maybe the early 80s. So yeah, a lot of changes. So we felt like it was appropriate to update the checklist. And if you don't have a checklist for your area, I just wanted to put in a plug for why checklists are really important. And this isn't just for, vector species of public health concern. Um, Really for all taxa, it's extremely helpful to have a checklist. And it's basically giving you your baseline inventory of what is known to occur in a given area. And one of the other really valuable functions of a checklist is it standardizes the nomenclature. So you'll list all of the known common names as well as the various scientific names, how they've changed over history, which makes it just easier for people to find records for this species they're interested in, and especially to track changes going forward into the future. So this can be really helpful in making conservation decisions, or for ticks, it's more likely to come into play with management decisions. So we made one for the state, but depending where you live, it might be appropriate to have a checklist for your county or for a tri-state area or what have you. But I do think they're really valuable resources. So this map shows the 21 field sites where we do our surveillance year-round. We go to each of these sites twice a month. So that does keep us pretty busy, especially when you consider we're a very small program. We don't have a lot of staffers. And this map shows for those 21 sites what the tick population looks like at a glance. So the size of the circle is correlated with the tick density there. So the larger the circle, the more ticks. And then each of the 4 main species are shown by a different color here. So you can see we do have some geographical disparity here, where in the northernmost part of the state in the Piedmont region, the most common tick is the longhorn tick, Hemophysalis longicornis. And then once you get into the coastal plain, the dominant species is the Lone Star tick. And in fact, like we have sites in Sussex County, our southernmost county, where like we do have more tick diversity than appears on this graphic, because it's just the sheer volume of the Lone Star ticks. Basically, that red color drowned out the other colors. But it is possible to get any of these 4 ticks in any of our 3 counties. They're just occurring, at different proportions. You'll notice I have a little trigger warning here because the next slide contains a graphic image, so it is not for sensitive viewers. I wanted to include this photo to make the point that ticks are not just a problem for people, but for pets and wildlife as well. So this is kind of a sad case of a white-tailed deer fawn that had to be euthanized by a wildlife rehabilitator. It had been so severely infested with ticks that it was very anemic and lethargic, and it was also blind from having ticks feed directly on its eyeballs. And this is an extreme example. White-tailed deer are pretty good at grooming. Mothers are good at grooming their fawns. This was a case where this fawn had been orphaned, and so it didn't have anyone looking after it, and that allowed the ticks to just get out of control. So it doesn't usually get this bad, but this is just an illustration of how bad it can get. So yeah, my team and I removed 2,709 ticks from this individual. They were all Lone Star ticks. Now this chart just shows our numbers for the top 5 most medically important ticks in our state. How many did we get in each year since the program began? And there's a lot of variation year to year. And so if you look at the blue line the blue text at the very bottom, that controls for the effort that we put in. Because there were some years when, we had fluctuations in staffing and or how much time of the year different positions were filled. So, but if you look at the lowest line, that tells you how many ticks were collected each square meter of dragging. So that allows us to kind of track true changes in tick abundance. So you can see, looking at these numbers, the Lone Star tick is definitely the most commonly collected. And until last year, until 2 years ago, black-legged ticks were our second most abundant species, but that they have in recent years been surpassed by the longhorn tick. And the longhorn tick really is seeing kind of a disturbing trend upward, where in the first year of our program, we only found 25 of them, and it has just, basically tripled or quadrupled each year since then. Gulf Coast ticks we find in relatively low numbers, but I do include it since it is an important vector species as well. So this is probably already very well known to most people on this call. I know I'm talking to professionals here, but I always like to include this graphic when I talk to the public, just to um, the point I'm trying to drive home when I share this graphic is just to illustrate how not all ticks are equally dangerous, and their life stage, the stage they're at in the life cycle, really plays a role in determining the level of risk associated with that tick bite. So I'll explain, they need 3 meals to complete their life cycle, and the risk of getting infected from a tick bite at each successive life stage goes up because a larval tick has not fed before. So while there is a non-zero risk of it hatching out of the egg already infected with one of our pathogens that can be transovarially transmitted from the mother tick, um, they're, the odds of that are relatively low. Whereas if you're bitten by a nymphal tick, it has already taken a blood meal, been exposed to, um, the blood of a host organism that may or may not have had pathogens circulating in it. And then if you're bitten by an adult tick, that is the most dangerous of all because you are the third and final blood meal. It has already had 2 meals previously. So when we test our ticks, we see that the adult ticks are roughly twice as likely to be infected compared to the nymphs, which is, just what you would expect based on this life cycle. So for our top species of medical concern, I'm going to just go over them briefly in ascending order of importance. So this is the one I always say, if I had to choose one to bite me, I would choose this one, the American dog tick, Dermacentor variabilis. And that's because we have tested, or we have had tested about 1,000 dog ticks so far, and to date, none of them have tested positive for any of the pathogens that we were looking for. So we were looking for Rickettsia rickettsii and Francisella tularensis. So while we haven't ruled out the possibility that those are circulating here, they do seem to be vanishingly rare. But moving on, oh, sorry. And I'm going to give a phenology curve for each of these species just to give an idea of when they're the most active in Delaware. So the dog tick has sort of a bimodal pattern here where it peaks in the late spring and again in like midsummer. And I've only included adult dog ticks here because the nymphs and the larvae are so unlikely to feed on people. Now, for the Lone Star tick, this is a bigger concern, not just because of how much more numerous it is, but because it's associated with alpha-gal syndrome and ehrlichiosis. We've also been testing them for Francisella tularensis, the agent of tularemia, but as we saw with the dog ticks, we have not had any positives for that pathogen in this species. And I've included Heartland virus and Bourbon virus on here because they have been detected in other states in the region, but knock on wood, we have not detected them in Delaware yet. And that is probably more for lack of effort than, or I shouldn't speculate. That could be just lack of effort, or it could be true absence. I'm not sure. But this gives an idea of their seasonality, their phenology. So this is a true like spring and summer tick, although with mild winters, we do see their activity extending later into the fall and beginning earlier in the spring in some years. I think the earliest in the year we ever found a Lone Star tick was February 11th. And this chart just shows our testing results for the first 658 Lone Star ticks that Delaware Technical Community College tested for us. And so you can see about 7% of them were carrying one of the Ehrlichia bacteria. So I would say, this one for me is a little scarier than the American dog tick, but I have saved the most dangerous for last, of course. And if you're interested, um, my colleague Michael Boney, he runs the molecular lab at Del Tech Community College. He published his PhD dissertation last year, where he actually created novel multiplex PCR assays to do this testing. And I think it's a, I think they're going to be like the new gold standard. They're an improvement over what had been used in the past. They're more sensitive. They're built on more previous data, so they're really up to date and sensitive, and you're not going to let anything fall through the cracks. So highly recommend you check out that publication. So the black-legged tick, Ixodes scapularis, is of course our most notorious species in Delaware. Not just because it vectors so many different pathogens, but also because a higher percentage of them test positive for one of those pathogens. So just reading off this laundry list, they're associated with, or they're able to vector the agents of Lyme disease, anaplasmosis, babesiosis, tick-borne relapsing fever, and Powassan virus. And all of these pathogens are found in Delaware. The most recent one that we added to the list is Powassan virus, and that was courtesy of Dr. Saravanan Thengamani's lab at SUNY Upstate University. So their tick testing lab detected Powassan virus in a black-legged tick nymph that had been submitted in May 2024. So I consider that a big public health win, just in that it turned up in a tick before it turned up in a person. So I'm really glad we were able to proactively get the word out about this potentially lethal neuroinvasive virus before anyone was hospitalized with it, as far as I know. So the black-legged tick is the major reason why we do our surveillance year-round, and it's because it is active every month of the year in some stage. So the adults are really active through the late fall and winter when our other species are more dormant. So I always tell people you are less likely to be bitten by a tick in the winter, but if you are bitten, that's going to be a bite you want to take very seriously because it's quite likely to have been carrying a pathogen. So I pooled testing results from Deltec and also from CDC. So for the first 1,858 black-legged ticks that were tested from Delaware, almost 35% of them were positive for the agent of Lyme disease, and about 2% of them were positive for tick-borne relapsing fever or for babesiosis, and about 1% for anaplasmosis. And we do have some ticks, some records of ticks that were triply infected with 3 pathogens. And through our veterinary clinic passive surveillance program, we're able to glean, what kinds of ticks are Delaware pets encountering. And there weren't really any surprises here. They're encountering the same species that we pick up on our flagging and dragging. So you can see Lone Star ticks, again, are very common. American dog ticks, no surprise, are common on dogs, as are longhorn ticks. And we have a few just like kind of one-off records of, like one brown dog tick, one rabbit tick, one winter tick, and a handful of Gulf Coast ticks. And so unfortunately, a lot of these are under the column heading of unknown hosts. Those are very likely dogs and cats. It's just the labels that on the tick vials are not always completely filled out. So we're always happy to take what we can get. We always remind participating clinics that we love to have the data, but we do realize that it eats into their staff's time when they're already in a pretty busy, high pressure job. So they don't always take the time to completely fill out the label. So we're understanding of that, although we would love to see at least what species these ticks are coming from. And we did publish the preliminary results from that passive tick surveillance program last year. We didn't bury the lead with the title here, it kind of gives it away. So we found 9 different tick species and 6 associated pathogens on ticks that were submitted from 5 different host species. So dogs, cats, rabbit, and ferret, and goat, maybe goat. I'm starting to forget. Um, so I mentioned earlier that I do curate a series of web pages at de.gov/ticks. So we have a lot of resources on there for the public, just sort of tips on how to identify ticks, what kind of diseases we have here that are associated with ticks for both people and for wildlife and pets. Tips on tick bite prevention, what to do if you're bitten, how to protect your yard and your pets. But what I think is the most useful tool on the website, it's what we call the tick interaction report. And I cannot take credit for this because I based it on a tool available from the Georgia Department of Public Health. Um, so basically, this web page invites users to upload a photo of their tick and just provide some basic details about when and where they encountered it. It comes to my inbox and I'll identify it to species and life stage if possible. Um, if it's a close and clear up enough photo. And I'm always, very careful to make it clear that I'm not providing medical advice. I'm not in any way licensed or, authorized to do that. But I will identify it just to help them evaluate their level of risk, and that will, make them better informed to make a decision on the next steps to take. So since the tool launched 4 years ago, about 800 ticks have been reported. So it's been interesting for me to see those tick reports come in because it gives me insight into the most commonly encountered species and life stages. Again, no real surprises with Lone Star ticks being our most common species. That is, what is most commonly encountered. But what I think was even more interesting for me to learn was that users who are uploading these photos would often, misidentify the ticks and underestimate the length of attachment time. And I don't expect, people from the general public to be experts on tick ID. I always tell people, I'm specially trained in this, so, for me, it's easy. So I wasn't surprised to see that happen. And we don't ask the people to those people submitting the photos to identify the tick, but there is a blank field where they can submit comments, and that's where this will turn up. So for example, with this photo, beautiful photo, um, the user said, I picked up this deer tick while walking the dog this morning. So, for me, I can tell at a glance it's not a deer tick because, you can see the pale marbled pattern on the scutum that lets me know it's a Dermacentor variabilis. But what was more concerning was that they thought they had picked it up the same day. And as you can probably tell, it's pretty heavily engorged, letting you know that it was feeding for several days. So if people aren't able to assess that, then they're going to be underestimating their level of risk. So, this tick was certainly attached long enough to transmit pathogens if it were carrying any. Whereas, if it had only been picked up that morning, the risk would be much lower. So, when I was putting this together, I was trying to think, what is unique about our program. I know a lot of what we do overlaps with what other states and other agencies are doing. We, as many other professionals do, we are employing a wide variety of different methods to try and get complementary data because there's no single method that's going to answer all the questions we have. So to really maintain a robust surveillance program, we're trying to incorporate all these different methods. But I think um, where the secret to our success is that we've teamed up with so many other agencies and researchers. So we have just really strong collaborations. And this has been just so helpful because we are restricted by a modest budget, and in turn, a very small staff. I won't say what our budget is on record, but you can ask me one-on-one, and I can tell you some people don't believe me when I tell them what it is because they think I must be mistaken because it is really quite humble. Um, but we've been able to accomplish a lot just by taking advantage of other people who are willing to let us tag along and work with them. So I listed some of them here just in case it kind of gets your wheels turning about opportunities for collaborations where you work. So of course there's veterinary clinics and zoos that have animals in their care, farmers and wildlife and rehabilitators. Now my office, my tick program is within the Division of Fish and Wildlife. So I know many of you might work for a public health department. So maybe you don't work closely with your Division of Fish and Wildlife, but consider reaching out to them because they're already, doing field work, accessing these different host species. And so it might not be that big of an ask for them to also remove ectoparasites. Think about the people who are dealing with nuisance wildlife, pest management professionals. You can also look for students, especially graduate students, who might have a research project that kind of dovetails with your surveillance goals, as well as people who work in museums and can give you access to natural history collections. So we've been fortunate enough to team up with the Delaware Museum of Nature and Science to look through their collections and uh, identify ticks that were removed from, taxidermied specimens. Um, and so on this note, I have like a long list of people that I'm grateful to for really expanding the scope of what our program has been able to accomplish. So too many for me to read here, um, but I have just abundant gratitude to everyone on this list. And with that, I will just turn it over to you for if you have any questions. Um, and I'm going to stop the share, but I will drop my contact information in the chat as well, so it'll be easy to find.
Great. Thank you so much. This is really interesting and important information, and hopefully people are getting ideas for their own programs. Um, if anyone has a question, please raise your hand or put it in the chat. I'm going to launch the post-webinar quiz question. Hopefully you guys know the answer now. But yeah, if anybody has questions, go ahead.
And I will say you had to be paying pretty close attention because I didn't really harp on it. It was just kind of buried in a slide. So I'll be actually impressed if you got it.
Looks like people are
It,
getting
yeah,
it
it
right.
looks like people are getting it.
Paying attention. What kind of PPE do you use when dragging?
That's a great question because when I talk to the public, I'm strongly advocating use of repellents, but I'm not practicing what I preach because I do have a concern that if I were, dosing myself with repellent each time I went out, that's going to potentially bias the sampling because it is so effective. So my team and I just rely on PPE tactics like tucking in our pants into our socks, wearing tall boots, tucking our shirts into our pants. So basically just trying to create barriers to make it harder for the ticks to find and access our skin, coupled, of course, with like frequent tick checks every time we come back. We're quick to uh, make sure none came back from the field with us. Um, but yeah, I I definitely advocate repellent for people who aren't trying to collect ticks like we are. And we do not wear permethrin treated clothing when we're on the job. So now on my own time, if I'm, recreating in the woods, then I do like to use permethrin treated clothing. I think it's a game changer just in how effective it is. It's like night and day, the difference I noticed when I started using it.
Yeah, I remember in our last presentation, I think we talked about like when doing the dragging, you wouldn't want to wear permethrin treated clothing, of course, but then
It's too good.
great for all the rest of the time. Yeah. Lots of good comments here, like best webinar presentation
Oh,
regarding surveillance program I've ever heard.
oh, that's really nice. Mm. Well, we've had the benefit of, learning from programs, bigger programs that, got established earlier. And so we're just kind of following in the footsteps.
It was really interesting, especially that you're looking at roadkill. You have so many different people to collaborate with. Definitely interesting.
I will say the roadkill is probably everyone's least favorite part of the job. Like all of our seasonal positions who've cycled through, whether they always say, they had a good experience, they're sad to leave, but they're not going to miss the
Yeah.
roadkill.
It's definitely interesting though. We have another question.
Oh,
Oh
sure.
wait, no, it's not a question, it's a
Okay.
comment. Double-sided carpet tape has worked better for me than permethrin
Mm.
treated clothing.
I've heard that's a good one too.
Time for more questions. If anybody has more. I can't remember if you addressed
Oh,
this, but what was the most common host you found longhorn horn ticks on?
that's a great question, and I didn't address it. I think we probably have the most records from dogs, but in our wildlife, among our wildlife hosts, we have found it on deer, red foxes, groundhogs. We haven't accessed that many groundhogs, but because we only find it occasionally as roadkill, but the few that we have seen were pretty loaded. And I believe we even have like one or two records of longhorn ticks on coyote and gray fox. And that's a great question. Have you found pathogens in your longhorn ticks? We have not, and that is because we haven't been testing them. So it is kind of an open question as to if they're carrying anything. So because of our limited resources, we've been prioritizing testing black-legged and Lone Star ticks. But um, I have in recent months sent some longhorn ticks out to researchers at other institutions, so we might get results back at any point, letting us know if they found anything in them. And there's a great question about are there reports of longhorn ticks on people? We do have a handful. It's not one of the more common species on people, but by this point, we maybe have like 10 records of it from across the 6 or 7 years of data. But that includes that 10 that we have reported includes ones that were not attached. So it might be like half as many if we're talking about ones being like fully attached.
Do you generate slash provide risk metrics density to public?
That's a great question. So not really. The maps that I showed that showed, tick density, those we've made available in different formats. Always share those in presentations. But it is kind of like this tightrope walk we have where, we collaborate with state parks and national wildlife refuges, um, and it's a delicate balance where they're letting us use their sites for surveillance, and and they're happy to facilitate that, but they also don't really want park names, being um, you know broadcast as, oh, look at all the ticks we found at this park. So um, we tend to keep like specific site names anonymized. We'll say, like, oh, this was found on public lands in this county, or um, you know, so I don't want to get in a situation where they don't want us coming to do surveillance anymore because we're giving them bad publicity.
Do
And so,
you,
oh yeah, sorry, I just saw
oh,
that
sorry.
one.
Do you use the CDC criteria of at least 750 square meters for density or just what distance you cover?
So we aim for doing a full kilometer of dragging at each visit. Um, but we have had situations where we have to curtail that, due to inclement weather, or um, usually for weather. I can't think of other examples. So we do always, faithfully record what distance we dragged, so that we always control for that as we're calculating density.
There was one question that was further up. What's the best color for dragging? And I think it's white, right?
That's what we use. And people have asked too, like what kind of cloth is the best? And I know there's different opinions out there. My personal favorite has been white denim because in the areas where we're doing dragging, we have a lot of thorny vegetation. And so when we've used thinner material, it gets ripped to shreds. So denim is providing like just the right level of like toughness, but it still gets plenty of ticks on it. Um, because we had at one time tried corduroy. Corduroy was like a little bit too like textured, like the smaller ticks that the larvae could just kind of like hide right in those like furrows. So that wasn't ideal. And when we've used like cotton flannel, it gets ripped to shreds. So um white denim is my favorite. And I've had some funny conversations where I'm buying it in bulk and they want to know what I'm making, and it
Mm.
and maybe a little confused when I tell them, "Oh, I'm just going to cut it into squares and drag it on the ground." Where do I source it? So that's been tricky. We used to go to a big fabric like retailer that has gone out of business. So we found a local store that I don't think they're a chain. So I don't even remember what they're called at the moment, actually. And so we make 1 meter square. Um, we hem it and make a little like pocket to slip the dowel in. And we also recently, my technician Taylor had the idea of adding smaller pockets so that we can slip washers in there to weight it down because we were having trouble with, in particularly windy days, it was blowing all over the place. So she made them a little tougher, more wind resistant with that addition. And the wooden dowels just like slip into the pocket and then you can easily slip them off when you need to wash them because we do wash them very frequently. So, the dirtier they get, the less effective they are just because it's hard to spot the ticks. And I'm seeing recommendations for other um, material that sounds promising.
You mentioned
Um, oh yeah.
through thorny vegetation sometimes. In such instances, do you flag or drag?
We aim to drag whenever possible just for consistency. But yeah, when you have a lot of I guess different heights of vegetation that you're covering. Um, Dragging doesn't work as well because it works better on like a flatter surface. So yeah, it's situation dependent. But yeah, in extreme cases, we will switch over to flagging and update our spreadsheet accordingly to know that we were diverging from our standard methodology there.
Any questions?
And if anyone comes up with a question, like something that occurs to you later, I will go ahead and just drop my email in the chat so that you have it so you can reach out at any time.
Great. Also, a while ago, I put the link in the chat. Maybe I can post it again for the website.
Oh, thank you. And Rosemary Kelly, I think, is the brain power behind the tick interaction report that we we
Ah.
we stole from Georgia.
All right. Well, I think that's all the questions. So thanks again. Great presentation. And thank you
Thank you.
everyone for being here. See you next month for our next webinar. Everyone will receive the recording who registered. Um, but yeah, have a good day, everybody.
Thanks for having me. Good to meet you all.
Nice to meet you.